Hey, what's going on? This is Craig, Gigawatts. This is a video on power supplies and what you need as far as power supplies are going. A lot of the chargers on the low end have power supplies built in. Most of the high-end chargers, the big watt output chargers, you have to buy a separate power supply. So when you get into parallel charging or series charging of big cells or big cell counts, you're going to need an external power supply. The misnomer right now is that because you have a 1,000-watt charger, you have to have a 1,000-watt output power supply. That's not really true. If you're never going to take that charger to its max, let's take, for instance, the iCharger 4010 Duo. That charger will do 40 amps on each side. It's a multi-port charger. It does 40 amps on each side. And it'll do a maximum of 10 cells. The charger in the spec sheet says that it goes from 9 volts all the way up to 50 volt input and up to 65 amp input. Well, if you take that 50 volts at 65 amps, you're up around 3,250 watts. In that, you have to run an industrial outlet to your RC room to charge. The normal house outlet maxes out at about 1,600 watts. That being said, that's on a clear circuit with nothing else on that circuit. So if you're on a circuit with, a bunch of lights and a bunch of different plugins, that number diminishes. So that's not to say that that charger isn't for you. If you like that charger because it has a 40 amp or two 40 amp charge ports, or the synchronized 70 amp charge port, you can still use that charger. Say for instance you have a 40 amp parallel board on one side of that charger and you're charging 3 cells in parallel at 40 amps. That's going to give you about 504 watts on that channel. Do you really need a 3,250 watt power supply if you're only going to run 500 watts? Or say you don't want to go completely crazy and buy high C charge rate packs. So you want to go to 20 amps. That's 252 watts. And you decide to do that on both sides. You're still only pulling a total of 504 watts. So to buy a power supply that can push 3,250 watts, or to find a plug-in that runs 220 or whatever it takes to push that big, that's a lot of extra cost if you're never going to use it. Now if you have 10 cell lipos and you want to crank them out at 40 amps, that's what it's going to take. You're going to have some big power supply. They are on the market, they are available, but that's a lot of money. I have seen guys who run them off of like forklift batteries, 48 volt forklift battery. I've seen guys who run them at 36 volts off of deep cycle marine batteries, like for a trolling motor. they just they have a bank of 4 deep cycle marine batteries under their pit table in their garage, and they cycle through those and run their chargers on deep cycle marine batteries. And then they plug them in on a tender and keep them charged so that the next time they want to use them, they're there. That's a possibility. But if you're not going to ever use those big numbers, you don't need that big power supply. Calculate out what you need or what you think you'll need in the future and buy a power supply accordingly. It's the same as the charger. You like some specific aspects of that charger, but you don't need the full amount of, whatever charger it may be. There's a wild range of chargers. Like I've said before, you can buy a charger from 0.5 amps all the way up to 70 amps. You can buy chargers that run 5 amp charge rate. You can buy that run 10, 15, 20, 25, whatever you want. And they'll charge, if you never plan to charge a 10 cell LiPo, then, there are chargers that will go 40 amps at 6 cells, or 40 amps at, whatever number you think your maximum is going to be. But like I said, the power supply thing, if you can get a decent price on a 1,000 watt or 1,500 watt, that's about as much as you're going to be able to plug into a wall anyway. So you really need to think about, when you're buying this giant charger that does all this crazy stuff, can you get a power supply, and how much is that power supply to push that many watts or that much amperage? Another use for big power supplies. If you have multiple chargers and you don't want to carry multiple power supplies, if you have a power supply that exceeds what you're going to need, and say you're going to be charging 5 amps, 50 watts, whatever, you can get a 1,000 watt power supply or 500 watt power supply and run 10 chargers. If you have a 500 watt power supply, you can run 10 5 amp chargers, if you're going to be charging 2 cells. One of the ways you could do that is with a distribution block. This is a distribution block. Basically, these leads get plugged into your power supply, and then you can hook up, on this one it just happens to be 5 chargers. But what you have to watch out for with using a distribution block is that the capacity of your distribution block. This particular distribution block happens to be the first 2 on this distribution block happen to have a 40 amp fuse on them. The last 3 have 10 amp fuses on each one of them. So you don't want to be trying to pull 20 amps through this distribution block. Otherwise you're going to pop the fuse. Some of these distribution blocks don't have fuses on them. So what will happen is the distribution block will melt. I've seen firsthand distribution blocks melt, and it's not pretty and it stinks. So with using distribution blocks, know the capacity of your distribution block and don't exceed it. If you have a charger that, and you want to pull, big wattage and big amperage, get a power supply with more than one output. Put your 5 amp chargers on your distribution block, hook your big charger directly to the power supply. On that note, if you plan to use a big power supply and you're going to a track, make sure the track owner knows what you're using. Make sure you know what you're using so that you don't cause problems for track owners when you kick the breaker and, shut out the lights because you're pulling more wattage than he know about. Be respectful of track owners. Be respectful of the other people at the track. Don't go in there trying to, pull 1,000 watts. That being said, if you're going to try to charge high cell counts, if you're going to charge in series and you're trying to charge big numbers and pull big cell counts, check with your charger manufacturer. Just because you have a 1,500 watt power supply that's pulling 12, that's running 12 volts at 150 amps, that doesn't mean that you have enough to run that charger. Some chargers have a limitation on how many amps the input amperage on the charger. Some chargers say if you're going to charge above 4 cell, they want 16 volts or 18 volts. If you're going to charge above 6 cells, they want 24 volts input. So make sure that you're watching input voltage and input amperage, and you know what your charger is recommended to charge at any specific input voltage. It might be that you have to increase your power supply to 24 volt or 36 volt or even 48 volt, depending on how high you want to run your cell count. Lower cell counts, 2 cells, 3 cells, 12 volts is enough. But check with your charger manufacturers. So, shop wisely. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, post below. I'll try to get back with you and help you figure it out. Thank you.